On December 25, 1929, a grisly crime took place. Charles Davis Lawson slaughtered his wife and 6 of his children. Just before Christmas, Charles Lawson took into town with his family to have a portrait taken. This wouldn't seem as strange, but due to the fact that he was a working-class farmer, it raised a few concerns. In this instance, he would be spending a lot of money just to get his family clothes and other things. Charles wasn't from an affluent background. His parents had been sharecroppers, a practice whereby they rented a small patch of land and in return gave a portion of their yield over each year to the landowner, and this was not a practice you could use to get wealthy. In 1911, he had met and married Fanny Manring, and after they'd saved up enough money by farming tobacco, they bought a rundown farm in 1927 close to his brother. This marriage was fruitful when it came to their children, and in total they had 8. Their names were Arthur, Mary, Carrie, Maybelle, James, Raymond, and Mary Lou. The third born, which was William, had died at 6 after contracting an illness. Charles was known to be a strict father, but he was also very devoted to his family. There were a few suspicions from the townsfolk that he had used money that he shouldn't really be able to afford, and no one actually saw what was to come. The morning of Christmas, Mary, who was 17 years old, woke to bake a cake for the festivities that had begun. During this, her sisters Carrie, who was 12, and Mabel, who was 7, set off to visit their aunt and uncle who lived close by. Charles was waiting by the tobacco barn, and as soon as the 2 sisters came into his view, he then shot them both with a 12-gauge shotgun. As heinous as his crimes were starting off, he wanted to make sure they were dead. He then proceeded to bludgeon them with the weapon. Charles returned to the home and opened fire on his wife Fanny, who was 37 at the time, while she sat on the porch. It killed her instantly. He moved into the house and Marie was hysterical. He wasted no time in shooting her dead before searching the house for the remaining children. James, who was 4, and Raymond, who was 2, attempted to hide. Charles found them and killed both the boys, as well as turning his way to Mary Lou, who was only 4 months. He then proceeded to beat her to death. Charles walked out into the woods and after a few hours he committed suicide. The remaining survivor of the Lawson family was Arthur, who was only 16 years old at the time. He had been running an errand while the murders took place. 2 sides were told for this story. Either Arthur came home and found his family to be murdered, or it was the relatives that were visiting who found them first. Regardless, according to the reports, their bodies were laid out with their arms crossed across them and pillows under their heads. For the first 2 victims who were found in their manor in the barn, but had rocks under their heads instead, Arthur was with a police officer and they eventually found his father, who had letters with him that he had written out to his parents. That Christmas morning, no one knew why Charles had snapped and performed this unspeakable act, but there have been plenty of speculation surrounding what could have drove him to committing this. Charles's relatives and friends pointed to the fact that he had suffered some form of a head trauma a few months before the incident. They believed this was the reason which drove him to madness. Insanity was seen as the sole reason for his actions, and it was reported in Twin City Sentinel the day after. It stated, believed to have become suddenly insane, Charles Lawson, 44, who lived near Germantown in Stokes County, Christmas Day killed his wife, Fanny, 38, and 6 of his 7 children, and then committed suicide. As per the speculation with the head trauma that Charles suffered before this heinous act, an article was written by Susie C. Spear in Greensboro News and Record, North Carolina. It goes on to explain that Charles had been acting erratically in the months leading up to the incident and had spoken to his doctors about terrible headaches and insomnia. The Meaning of Our Tears was written by Trudy J. Smith, and this backs up the behaviour of Charles leading up to the crime. You would think that this would be the end of the case. However, Trudy J. Smith and M. Bruce Jones wrote another book called White Christmas, Bloody Christmas. In this they claim to have proof of the reason why Charles went through this killing spree. The reason was that he had raped Marie and gotten her pregnant. They claimed to have heard suspicions about their relationship and received an anonymous tip from someone who had gone on a tour of the Lawson farm, where the tour guide had used an incest story. Adding to this horrific tale, just before this book was to be published, Stella Lawson, Charles's niece, claimed that she had heard at the funeral relative discussing how Fanny had her suspicions that there was something horrendous going on between the 2. Trudy J. Smith continued and started with her first book and explained that a close friend of Marie's, LMA Johnson, told the story that during a sleepover with Marie, she had to come clean and confess that she was pregnant with Charles's child, to which Sam Hill, a neighbour of the Lawsons, claimed that Charles had told Marie if she told anyone, there would be some killings done. As crime cases go, they will always have speculations and theories. It's up to you to understand what you believe, and I'll definitely see you for the next case.